Inquiring Minds. My name is Doug, and thanks for joining me on another Pen Resurrection Sunday on Inquiring Minds. Today's cadaver on the slab is this 1940 Parker Duofold Vacumatic speedline filler in a lovely vertical striped celluloid. This pen was donated for dissection by John Summers. Thank you, John. And while we look at the pen in its 84-year-old condition, I'll relate some of the history of this pen. Although Parker discontinued the Duofold in favor of the new model Vacumatic in 1933, Parker revived the name Duofold for these beautiful vertically striped stacked celluloid pens in 1939. Some were button fillers and others were Vacumatics, like this speedline filler. There were three sizes of Vacumatic Duofolds: large, medium, and small. This one is a medium at 5 3/16 inches in length in a color called dusty red or maroon. They were slightly less expensive than the flagship Vacumatics. It has a V-shaped clip very similar to the Parker Challenger. Here's a Challenger from between 1934 and 1940. I don't know the year yet because I haven't taken the nib out of this one yet. This one belongs to my good friend Lori and belonged to her dad, and it's engraved with his initials. It is a button filler and it's in really rough shape, but not as rough as the nib, which has one of the tines broken off and is pretty wavy. I've got some new tools coming that I'm going to try to repair this nib, maybe make it into a stub because the tipping material's gone off of one of those tines. And Parker discontinued the striped Duofold in 1940. Let's do some triage on this dead pen and see what we're up against for resurrection. Okay, so we have very little brassing, a little bit of brassing on the clip, but it should polish up. It's gold filled, some tarnishing on the tip. That end jewel looks like it's a bit raised out of there. We have a couple of cap bands that should polish up very nicely, and there's lots of wear. This is an 84-year-old pen after all. And let's see if we can see some imprints here. Getting a little closer. We see Parker Duofold with a code. It looks like a 0 dot, which would be the third quarter of 1940. And then it says made in the USA. And then there are some initials, BCB. We got some gouges out of this celluloid, but the celluloid is quite beautiful. And the end finial on these striped Duofolds was just shaped into the celluloid. The cap unscrews nicely. And there is our speedline filler. And the spring seems to be in good condition. And there's even some of that imprint that says pause between strokes. That's what she said.
Get that ugly thing out of my face.
That's what she said.
To fill pump, that isn't readable, but I'm thinking it says 3. It moves, but there's no sack in there at all. So now let's take a look at the business end of the pen. No gouges out of it, just needs a little bit of a polish. Lots of scoring where that cap has scored that barrel over 84 years. And the nib itself, get my loop out here and see it says Parker pen made in USA. It looks like a medium tip, and the ebonite feed, of course, looks like it's in good shape. Now we have to get this section off, and we have to get this bit out of here. This is the tool that I have to take that Vacumatic out. It's from the inky nib, and it is a lump of aluminum with a steel rod and a collet on the inside. There's the collet. They come in small and large sizes for the two different sizes of Vacumatics that Parker made. And we put the collet on that thread. We screw this down, which clamps the collet on that thread. And then you give this a twist and it doesn't come off. And they usually don't come off because they're on there pretty solidly. So what we have to do is to soak this first in some pen flush, which is 10 parts distilled water and 1 part ammonia. I'm going to soak it a little bit in my ultrasonic and get as much of that old ink out of there as possible. And then we'll add some heat to the outside of this celluloid to allow it to expand a little bit and hopefully release that vacuumatic pump. And I'll try to do all that on camera. So here is the ultrasonic bath, and we're going to put both the cap and the body of the pen into the pen flush. Turn it on and let it leach out a lot of ink. You might be able to see it coming out there now. So we'll give that a couple of minutes in the bath and rinse it off with some clear water, and we'll put our tool on it and see whether we can apply some heat. Okay, that's been a couple of minutes. Retrieve it. And it looks like there was some red ink in there, rosish color. There, now I've rinsed it with some clear water. Got a cotton swab in there. Okay, we got a lot of that ink out of there. We'll take a few more cleanings to get the inside a little bit cleaner. Might as well give it a try before I apply any heat. Maybe it loosened it up enough. Usually not. Use a little bit of gripping material. I always like to put the cap on to protect that nib. And see whether... Oh, look at that. Is that slipping on the threads? Might be just slipping on the threads. No, it's not coming. So we're going to have to apply some heat. I apply heat with a heat gun on a low setting, and I oscillate the heat gun and rotate the pen at the same time, keeping my fingers close in proximity to that hot air. If my fingers get too hot, then I back off. And after a couple of seconds of heating it, I'll apply the celluloid to my lips. And if it burns my lips, that celluloid is getting too hot. Celluloid has a melting temperature that's fairly low, around 120 degrees to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And we don't want it to melt or deform in any way. So I'm going to put the collet back on it again. So I find it a good handy way of being able to check it while it's still warm. And we'll rotate the pen like that. So this might take many, many times doing this. But I want to catch the vacuumatic pump at the moment it releases and not overheat that celluloid. That might be the thread slipping, I'm not sure. Sometimes that collet will slip off of there. Other times that will be the unit coming out, and it is the unit coming out. Good. So that didn't take much heat at all. I didn't get near the melting point of that celluloid, and there it's released. And now that unit is stuck down inside there, which is typical. It takes a little bit of pushing from the other side. And now while we have the heat gun out, we need to relieve that section from the barrel as well. So same thing applies here. A little bit of heat around that barrel, and we keep testing it and testing it until it releases. Try it without. There we go. So yeah, it's stuck in there pretty good. So we'll heat it up some and see whether we can get it to release. There we go. Just a tiny bit of heat that time. I've had to go at these things for days sometimes. There. Now those threads have disengaged. And there is our section and nib. There's the breather tube. And I want to get that nib out of that pen. I have to knock that ebonite feed out to eject the nib. But I'm actually going to wait until I get a new tool. It's coming in the mail. It should be here next week. And so I might clean all this up to begin with and then begin again next week when I get that tool. It's a knockout block. I had an Inkquiring Minds fan send me some money to buy a proper tool. He didn't like my jerry-rigged knockout block and said, you need to get the right one. Sent me some money to buy the knockout block. Thank you, Bill, for that. It was wonderful. And it should be here next week. And so I'm going to delay knocking this out with my jerry-rigged knockout block and do it with the new one when it arrives. Let's see if I can get that feeder tube out of there. There we go. There's the feeder tube. And I'm going to clean that out as well. What I do is run a guitar string through there to get out any caked up ink, and then we'll put that in the ultrasonic bath, and then we'll knock out that nib. We can now push that whole mechanism out of there. Actually, I'm going to get my orthoscopic camera out and see whether I can inspect the inside of that barrel before I push on it at all. As you can see from this orthoscopic camera view, the sack is completely gone, and you can see the end of that rod pumping up and down. And here is the remnants of the sack, some of it anyway, desiccated sack. I'll take an Allen wrench and see whether I can push that rod the rest of the way out. There's lots of crunchy stuff on the inside of that. You can see I'm crunching out a lot more material. No, it doesn't want to go. So I'll put this back in the bath again, and we'll try to get that to release. But no real pressure. Don't want to break anything. This isn't new. Now, before I go much further, get a little plastic case out here, little tiny pieces into, so we don't lose them on our workbench. So I'll save those for later. I soaked that barrel again, and we'll keep trying to work out some of the debris in that barrel. Well, I should get a sponsorship from Q-Tip for the amount of Q-tips that I go through. So we'll see whether we can force this out. The barrel is plenty transparent now. Look at that. That's nice. Actually able to see the end of that pellet collar where the Vacumatic sack is attached. Might have to apply a little bit of heat. There. A little bit of heat is your friend. There. Now that's out of there. Let's get the collar back. There we go. So that's the way that operates. Previous to this, there was the lockdown filler, which went down like that, and there was a little bayonet notch in there. You gave it a twist, and it locked down, and the blind cap was a lot shorter. There's a pellet in there. You can get a standard Vacumatic sack. Diaphragm. It's not really a sack because it doesn't hold ink. So there's a little pellet right there in the end of that sack that gets pressed into that little hole, and it holds it in place while you fold the rest of the diaphragm back onto this little tapered barrel here. So what we have to do is get that old pellet out of there. And I usually use my Dremel tool for that. And here's my Dremel-like tool. It's by Ryobi. And I like it because it's sort of in a portable battery pack and is small enough to hold like a pencil. And has variable speeds on it. I've got a cutting tool on it right now, and I have to break out my second set of eyeballs here. I've got a headlight with a light there and magnifying lenses for my old tired eyes, so I can see what the hell I'm doing.
Open the door, Mr. Buckle, the blind man! You got that door closed again, huh?
And we're just going to try to break up that little plastic ball that's in there without getting into any of that brass surrounding. A lot of that black is the old sack. Now I'll get out some dental tools to pick out the remnants of that little ball and some of that sack. Might have deformed the ball enough to make it want to come out. Yeah, it's breaking up. That's good. You see I sort of drilled it down to half its size, and down inside there further, I don't want to drill down too far because the end of that rod is attached right there. That's looking pretty good. Now we have to clean up the inside of that barrel, and I have a handy tool for that as well, and that is this set of brushes. I think they're designed for cleaning test tubes or something. On here, I'll soak this in pen flush and then run through the barrel to get out any extra debris. There's a lot of that diaphragm still stuck to that ledge in there. I'm using another dental tool, a scraper, to just go around that ledge This is very intricate work, and the barrel is in really good shape. So we can actually polish that up now, and we'll see about getting that clip off of that cap so we can polish it up as well. And a technique for that is to use a rubber mat and try to get that jewel to turn, as it's a screw thread. But we shall see if I can get this to turn. Might take a little bit more soaking. So that cap jewel does not want to budge. So my last solution is to go to Pensbury Manor, Penetrate Pen Potion number 7. I don't know about 1 through 6, but this one works sometimes. So I'm going to drop a couple of drops just on that finial of Pen Potion and let it penetrate for a while, and we'll see if it budges. So I just double checked my eBay purchase of the knockout block, and here I thought it said March 2nd for delivery, and it says March 22nd. So I'm not going to wait that long to knock this block out. I'll just use my jerry-rigged setup. It's worked before. It may be ugly, but it works.
But as a man, you are barely passable. But as a woman, you are a dog. That's your opinion, big boy.
Here we are with my homemade kit. I've used this before because it fits that section very nicely. It's a socket wrench, 9 millimeters, and that section goes down in there perfectly. The nib goes through safely, and the top of the section sits right on the base of that socket, just like that. And then I can put it down over the hole, which is over another hole. So I've got clearance. Huh? Then I can whack away with my Allen wrench on top of that back of the feed.
Hey, Tone. This is not what I thought it was!
To push it through. I'll just swing the camera out of the way for a second. In the way. There we go. So there's the section. And their nib should be down in here. There it is. And there's my feed. And the section looks none the worse for wear. And the feed looks a little bit dented as long as that breather tube goes in there. But let's take a look at the nib here. And I can't see on the camera, so I'll have to look with my loupe. And it's got a 0 dot, which means the third quarter of 1940. So I'm going to give this a little bit of a rub with some metal polish just to get the ink off the underside of that nib. See, that ink comes right up. And give it a little bit of that on the front. Been sitting in there with dried ink in it for 84 years. And get out our polish cloth and rub its backside. Thank you very much.
I thank you.
This is a jewelry polish cloth. And give it a bit of a polish as well. Let's see what it looks like after 80 some odd years. Look at that. Very nice. So now we'll polish up that section, polish up that feed. I'll use some of my favorite Meguiar's Mirror Glaze Swirl Remover number 2. It's a very fine polishing compound. Sometimes to get a better grip on these tiny sections, I'll put a paintbrush in there since they're tapered, and it gives me a better purchase. That's not too bad. Might polish it some more as we go. Now let's take a look at the feed. The only part I need to have shiny is right back here. See, already looking pretty good. Put those parts back in my little cup, and we'll see about getting that diaphragm attached and back into this barrel to get this pen working. So we need our pellet pusher, and a little bit of talc, need my X-Acto blade, and my scissors. So let's push that pellet first. That pellet's right up against that dimpled head of the pellet pusher, and I can feel where that marking is for cutting it. So I can push that with my X-Acto blade and then cut it at the mark. Boy, that's so simple rather than having to measure. So we give that a push, and we push into the pellet holder And that seems to be secure. Then we dredge our sack, a little bit of talc, and then we can use the pellet pusher as a mandrel. Fold that sack back on itself. This can be a little bit of a tedious process. Sometimes my other pellet pusher from Pendragon's is a little bit easier since it's thicker at that end. There we go. Just to get that moving. And so it sits right up against that collar. So that's where you want it to be. Right there, pushed up flush against that collar. And so you can see how that diaphragm moves in and out. So now putting it in this barrel, which I've cleaned thoroughly. I need my tool again and a little bit of silicone oil. This is silicone oil for treadmills. It's for lubrication, not for sealing against ink leaks. And we're going to put a little bit on just the leading edge of that diaphragm so that it'll slide into the barrel nicely without sticking as I twist it. I'm going to put this on the collet and clamp that down, and we twist it into the barrel until we meet some threads. There, hand tight. There, you can see it. See it working inside there. Put the blind cap back on, and then we can put our section back in the barrel as well. So I can go ahead and do some polish work. Making progress. I'm back for another day of pen resurrecting. I was not successful in getting that jewel off of that cap, so I'm going to have to mask off the clip when I'm polishing this cap. And I'll mask off those gold bands as well. So now we go through the process of trying to polish up that barrel. So we're going to get off most of the wear, the micro abrasions and things like that, and we're going to avoid the imprint of the Parker Duofold. I'm going to keep the blind cap on it so that we don't get any separation between that joint. We want that to be as invisible as possible. So I'll go over the micromesh chart from 1500 down to 12,000 as we go. But generally I like to give it a buff with the 1500 first and then wipe it off and take a look to see if there's any deeper gouges than the 1500 will take off. So if there's a gouge here and there that I want to get out, I'll just spot sand that spot on this flexible cloth 400 grit sandpaper and then go back over it. And then we'll go back down the grades to the finest polish, and then we'll use some polishing compound on it as well. You can see I still have those lines where the cap has been wearing over the years after the 1500, so I might take some 400 grit to that. Yep, not too bad. So those initials are very deep, so I wasn't worried about going over it, but I just went over it lightly. You're gonna have to pardon my guitar fingernails, but they are excellent pointers. I should mention that I am wearing my headlamp during this so I can look at the very, very minute detail. I'm done with the 1500 grit, and at this point I'm looking for any extra gouges and also any abrasion marks that the 400 grit left behind. There, now I've just polished it with a couple of stages of rubbing compound and polish, a coat of Anderson Pen's Microgloss number 5, which is a polishing compound. I went all over the entire pen with that. Then I went at it with Anderson Pen's Microgloss number 1, which is a polish. And you can see it's looking very shiny and very nice indeed. I've masked off the clip. You can see the difference between the barrel and the cap. So I'll do the same treatment that I did to the barrel, to the cap, and then we'll polish up the gold. There we go. That clip is looking very nice. Still signs of vintage age on it, but that gold is polished up very nicely. I'm going to actually test that nib first. I just taped it to the feed. I'm going to dip it in some Waterman's, and then we'll give the nib a try. It's fairly scratchy side to side, so I think it's misaligned. There's some nice flex to it and a lot of feedback. I may do some adjustments to that nib before I put it back in the section, you might be able to see that they're slightly misaligned. So I'm going to straighten those up a little bit and then maybe give it a little bit of micro mesh to polish it up. Okay, well, that wasn't good. While I was adjusting those tines, that one tine snapped right off.
She's dead, Jim. Just like the other one.
And I wasn't actually even pushing on it. I was just adjusting the tines like that, back and forth, to try to get them aligned. But that might have been why they were misaligned, because that tine was slightly bent and it snapped right off. What do you do with that? Well, it's not going to write like that. So what I'm going to do is try to align these, and I might have to grind this into a stub. It's worked for me before, but otherwise that is a dead nib. So we have to do something with it to get it writing. It broke right at the weld point of that tipping material, but I'm going to cut it off chisel point so that I can use micro mesh on it. Not near deep enough. It might work for being able to see if I can grind that nib. I'm going to work on the nib first, and we'll see whether we can get that writing. Well, I ended up having to knock that feed and nib out of there again, and I opened the channel a little bit more, and I actually got the feed a little bit deeper, and I was able to get the tines aligned, which is the big thing. So that is slight oblique right now, and the wrong way oblique. So I might have to grind on that, but I've got it fairly square and the tines tight together. So I have my fingers crossed that we can do something with this. So I've got the nib fairly square, and I've rounded it a little bit on all corners, all edges, with some 1800 grit, just by moving it lightly like that several times. And I've tried it on some paper, and of course at this grit it is really scratchy. The tines are together. I'm getting some ink flow. Right now it's very, very rough. I'm taking some heart that I'm getting some lines out of it. Now I'll just move up through the micro meshes and polish out those edges. It seems to be a good angle and a very interesting stub nib. That looks like about a 0.06, I would guess, at this point. And that looks like a, oh boy, 0.08 to 0.9, something like that. I'll measure those and we'll find out what kind of stub it is. But if I can polish this up so it's smooth, all might not be lost. So I think I've got this nib writing well. It's still not as far into that section as I'd like it, but because it's writing well and it's well aligned, I'm reluctant to push it any further down into that section, as it might misalign it. And I've got plenty of cap clearance here, so I'm going to put the section back in the barrel. I'm not going to shellac it down at all. Just going to add 1 drop of silicone oil to that thread, making sure not to get it anywhere but on those threads, because silicone likes to keep ink from flowing. So we'll screw that down. Nice bead of silicone oil there. Make sure there's no leaks. Now to ink up the pen and give it a try. Pump 2 or 3 times, it says. I just keep pumping until I hear no more bubbles. That way I know all the air is out of the system, or as much as possible. There we go. Cap does not post as well as it might have back in the day. Celluloid tends to shrink and it really wants to fall off of there, but let's give this a try. From dead to living, to dead again, to perhaps living again. 1940 Parker Striped Duofold. And it has a 14 karat gold. Now it's a stub. It's generous. Let's measure these lines here. The horizontal line is 0.4 and the vertical line is 0.7. So 0.4 to 0.7 millimeters, which means it goes from a Western extra fine to almost a broad. Gingerly try out some line variation here. See how much it flexes. It actually flexes. Look at that. So let's push on this and give that line a measure. It's going right up to a 0.9, which is like a double broad. And as to smoothness, well, this is just like glass now. Very, very smooth in all directions. So I've been writing with this, and every time I feel a bit of a scratch, I'll run it across a little bit of 12,000 grit to polish out that little burr. The one thing I should remind you of, this nib is 14 karat gold, and generally 14 karat gold nibs would have tipping material on them. Well, it originally had tipping material, and that tipping material is some kind of an iridium alloy, which is very, very hard. Gold, relatively, is very, very soft. As soon as I got rid of all that tipping material, one of them fell off and I ground off the other. I'm left with just pure gold. So this is a stub that's gold with no tipping. So when I was doing my polishing, going up through the micro mesh, I was going very gingerly, very lightly, because gold will disappear a lot faster than the iridium tipping that you're used to. So I went very, very, very carefully as I was grinding that nib down to smooth. But now I'm very pleased with this. So this resurrection was fraught with some difficulties. Polished up very nicely. The nib and feed came out very, very easily. The Vacumatic pump, just a little bit of heat, and I got that out, and that was very pleasing. And so when everything goes so swimmingly, you start wondering, okay, well, what's going to jump up and bite me in the ass?
Oh, bite me!
And that one time, just the tipping on it just popped right off, just like popcorn. And that's how brittle these old nibs can be. So that can happen on a vintage nib, and you're hooped. What can you do but find another nib or make the best of it? And so that's what I did. I made the best of it. Now, I might get criticized by some people for actually going ahead and clipping the end of that nib off after I broke the tine on it. You can get the tines re-tipped if you want. I don't have that facility to do that. That's very expensive to have it done. And I just wanted the pen to write because it was dead before, and I was hoping that it might live again. And so I went ahead and polished that down to a very, very smooth stub, and the pen is now writable. I mean, that's the point. So again, thanks go out to John for donating this very beautiful striped duofold from 1940 to my channel so I can do a resurrection for you. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And you can join as a member of my channel as well for only 99 cents a month, and I guarantee I'll answer your comments in the comment section, and you'll get cool emojis, badges, sneak peek unboxing videos, as well as instant notification whenever a new video is posted. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you for watching, and that's all she wrote.
I made this.